This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Avoid the Maze. And my guest today is Catherine. I hope I pronounced this correct. Is it TD?
Yeah, great job.
Very good. And I met Catherine through podmatch.com, where I meet many of my guests. And what attracted me to her bio was how she has come on this journey, and her journey through life now is helping other people. And many of us, that's what we dream about doing. We want to help somebody, but we sometimes don't think that we are qualified. But the reason that we are is because we've lived it. And that's how I got to be where I am today. And I'm sure, Catherine, when you tell your story, we're going to hear a little bit about that. So go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of background.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm Catherine Teedy. People may know me through my LinkedIn. I post on there regularly and grew quite a large following in the past year and a half. I think there are 45,000 people on there now. And I've gotten a lot of cool opportunities from it. Podcast invitations like this one. This is actually from Podmatch, like we talked about earlier. I was featured on a billboard in Times Square. I've had media features, all sorts of stuff from that. And it's just been a ride. I'll throw it back to you. You can ask me.
Is this, when you were growing up, is this the way you envisioned your life? Because many of us, we got to where we are today, not necessarily the way, now we're exactly where we thought we were going to be. At least I certainly didn't think that I was ever going to get the opportunity to get into broadcasting. In the late 60s, when I was graduating high school, I told my parents that's what I wanted to major in. And they looked at me as if I was the craziest person in the whole world. But I went ahead and I started my education journey and didn't really do anything until about 10 years ago. So that's a long time in between.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you get there?
Okay, I never thought I would be an influencer or a thought leader of any type. I started online for my current 9 to 5. I work with Fortune 500 islands, governments to help them with renewable energy infrastructure. And you can't just cold call these places. So I started writing online to get a little pull marketing happening, and it just blew up. And so I've kind of been gearing towards that. I still work at my 9 to 5, so it's a total side hustle still, but I started to do the things that come with social media influencing, like the stuff I mentioned before, working with brands, stuff like that. So it was something completely out of my comfort zone. At the time, I didn't have any other social media, just LinkedIn and Pinterest, if you count that, and hadn't posted anything. If I had posted before, it was like a picture of what I did that weekend on Instagram, but I hadn't done that in years. So putting your face and your name out there in front of like colleagues,
Right.
it's definitely out of my comfort zone, but it worked out.
And a lot of us have had to move out of our comfort zone to really get into the 21st century because,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I had a conversation with somebody the other day and they said, wasn't it so nice back in the 50s and 60s? We just sat on our porch and we talked about what was in the newspaper and maybe what was on the evening news. And now we talk about it 24/7 in various different ways and in
Mm-hmm.
various different languages. My son, who lives in Texas, he'll text me something in the middle of the day and it's all acronyms. And I still sometimes have to stop and, go research what is he really talking to me about. So we've come a long way, but we have to know how to say things appropriately. And that's one of the things I think that you're referring to is now that, you're working in the government. And so whatever you post there has to sound professional, look professional.
Mhm.
And yet the tendency in social media is using acronyms and slang that we never would have thought of before.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. That's something I talk about a lot actually is when you're speaking to someone, you have to speak their language. So to write a post that's going to reach a bunch of people, it has to be relevant, but it has to be generic. It has to interest a big group of people. So I would say the more you niche down, the better. But the evergreen content that can go more viral sometimes is that stuff that will resonate with everybody, not just one niche.
Yes,
And so I write about a lot about personal development or self-help type posts. And yeah, I mean, on LinkedIn, it's a little different. You don't really use this like acronym slang or anything like that. But on Instagram, I just started an Instagram and it's okay to like put a winky face at the end or say LOL in the post and it's a little more, when you're doing it on a platform like Instagram, you can be a little more loose and it makes you sound a little more relatable. So,
absolutely.
um, yeah, there's always a language to every platform, every person you talk to, and you have to be flexible.
Well, and that's the big thing. It's all about flexibility. And if you're not
Mhm.
flexible, um, that's when you are finding that you are not connecting. I know when I first started podcasting, I had this vision that my listeners were going to be men and women 45 up. And I still see that as my vision. However, that is not what I'm attracting.
Mhm.
Strangely enough, I have more males than females that listen, and
Interesting.
they are males in the 30 age range, like
Oh,
30 to 40. And I had a long talk with my son about it because he's in that age range. And he said, it's because you're relatable. You're not
mm,
the mother. You're not,
mhm.
the iron figure. You're talking about subjects that resonate with them. And I
Right.
said, okay, now I get it. And
Yeah.
then I started asking my audience, you know, why aren't I drawing in the women who I think I represent? And I'm hearing from that age group saying, but you don't represent me. You have a life. And many women at the age of 60, 65, they've just given up. They're who they are is who they are. They're not going to be anything
Mhm.
anymore. And your generation is totally different. You're constantly evolving. So how does that work? Because I know I have people who say to me, you're not the same person you were last year, Karen. It's like, you're right.
Mhm. Yeah, I completely agree. There's a lot of change. I think technology has a lot to do with that. We see things maybe that aren't completely true online and we compare ourselves to that. And then we think that we have to change to fit that mold or whatever it may be. That's one theory. There are many, I'm sure. But I think embracing it is key. The most growth you have is outside of your comfort zone, as everybody knows. And if you can embrace the discomfort for a little while, I talk about in one of my posts embracing the beginner's mindset. So embrace the embarrassment that comes with being a beginner. I started jujitsu at age 34. That's like, I'm like ancient compared to my uh, the other girls who are in the class. And you just have to go in with no ego and embrace embarrassment. I read a good quote the other day. It was like, embarrassment is the cost to entry and what you're entering is success. So if you want to be good at something, you have to be a beginner, and letting the ego go is a great way to do that.
Well, it's interesting because growing up as a baby boomer, I basically was taught, if you make a mistake, you better fix it right away because, mistakes are bad.
Mhm.
And it's not that I ever got my hand hit by my parents for making mistakes, but I felt very degraded, in many
Mhm.
ways. It was like,
Shame. Yeah.
didn't you know any better? Well, if I knew better, I probably wouldn't have made the mistake. No, I
Right.
didn't. I went into it and I tried. And it wasn't until I became a young adult that I actually sat my parents down and said, so when I baked my first cake and I forgot to add the eggs, okay, that was a mistake. And I learned very quickly because it didn't raise it, it was absolutely horrible. But I had to go back and look at the recipe and figure out what I had missed. And I said,
Mhm.
so why am I being degraded for that? Because I went back and I figured it out. And now I know from here on in, I'll always add the eggs. And my parents looked at me and they said, you're right. You learned. And so
Yeah.
that's been my big thing with my sons and my husband and myself. When I first met my husband, he was in the photo industry and he invited me to come to a photo show and he said, I need you to help me. And I don't know the first thing about photography. He said, I'm going to teach you one thing. And he did. And I repeated it for 3 days at the show over and over again. Monday, he went into his dealers and they were ordering exactly what I talked about for 3 days.
Mhm.
And he said, now do you know how it works? I said, well, yeah, after repeating it all that time, I do. He said, so now you know something about photography. And from that point, it was like, hey, I can learn more.
Mhm.
That's what people have to learn. I was not in my comfort zone. I felt like an idiot, to be honest. Um, but I covered it up because I was representing him.
Mhm.
So what do you tell the people that, come to you for advice or who you share advice with? Because so many of us will say, no, I can't move out of my comfort zone. This is who I am and this is where I got to stay.
Yeah. I read a really good book recently about this. It's called Culture Hacks. The name of the author is on the tip of my tongue. I can't think of it. Michael, oh, I don't want to mess it up, but Culture Hacks. And he talks about how different cultures have different ways of learning like that. So in Japan, mistakes are like way no, like the shame is very high. Suicide rate is very high because of it. And they learn a lot by intuition. So if they're learning tennis, for example, they won't pick up a tennis racket until a year after they've started tennis, meaning they've picked up balls for other players, they've watched to see like how they recover from falling or whatever. And they don't pick up that racket until they feel like they're perfect at it. And I think I don't know how that relates to the United States, because in the United States, we're a very like fail forward culture. And so like your mindset when you sat your parents down, you're saying, how would I have ever learned without making that mistake? And that's very much our culture. And I think that if I were to tell someone to start something new, get out of their comfort zone, I would maybe I would maybe send them to a YouTube channel or something like that to show them like failing forward is very healthy in our culture for sure, because that's how we learn. We go, my favorite advice ever is just start. So like if you want to do something, don't think about it forever. It doesn't have to be perfect before you start it. Just start and start making those mistakes and make as many mistakes as you can. And maybe if you're offering a service, do it for free, or offer a money back guarantee, where if you're making videos for someone's website or something like that, offer to do a video. If they don't like it, they get their money back, and just keep practicing and failing forward until you get it down, because you'll never get it down unless you make the mistakes. That's how intuition is built.
And even once you have that background and information, as things
Mhm.
change, you still have that
Yeah.
opportunity to make mistakes. I've learned in the last 10 years that being vulnerable is a great thing,
Mhm.
because when I can express what I'm not as good at, it gives me that, little push and says, okay, how can you get better at it? So the
Right.
day that I started podcasting, um, my husband said to me, now that you've been kicked out of corporate America, what is it that you're going to do? And I said I wanted a podcast. I didn't know the first thing about it. This was 11 years ago. And he said, okay, what equipment do you need? And I went out and I Googled it, and I got the most expensive equipment, which was totally ridiculous, but I felt like a pro.
Okay.
Um, and in the first year that I was doing it, they were not the best, absolutely weren't. But
Yeah.
I always came on with the caveat, okay, this is in its infancy. I'm going to make mistakes. Please point them out to me.
Mhm.
And I had people coming out saying, I can help you with that. Okay.
Yeah.
Either your microphone is not good enough or whatever it was, or you're not prepared for your guest. And it'd be like, oh, that's what I missed. Was so
Mhm.
busy with all the electronics. In the beginning, I was not prepared. I knew who I was inviting on. I had one sentence, and that was it. And if my guest wasn't talkative like you are, guess what? It was a flop. But I learned. I could go back and listen. So
Yeah.
here you're doing this. You said, um, this isn't your bread and butter yet. You're still working, a 9 to 5 government job. When do you know that it's the right time to say, hey, I can step out of this? I'm going to step out of my comfort zone.
Right. Um, so just to be clear, I work with governments. It's not a government job.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Work with government.
just
Okay.
so
Thank you.
if they watch this. But I'm not sure. I love what I do. I do renewable energy. Um, and I'm very like one with the earth, like hippie girl. So it's something I really love. It's not something that I could start on my own. I wouldn't even want to start on my own. My company is really good too. Um, but that's a great question. I don't have the answer. Maybe if one starts producing more benefit for me than the other, that's when I would move. But right now I have time. I don't have kids. I can, do both, and it's fine.
And a lot of young people today happen to be working with companies that are flexible, and they're looking for the talents that you have, which is a great thing. Back,
Mhm.
when I started working, it wasn't that, if you didn't have
Right.
this skill set, you weren't going to get the job. And if you
Mhm.
had this skill set, you're working 9 to 5 for me, don't even look out the window. Um,
Right.
so for those of you listening, and especially those of you who, you know, may not be on the younger side of employment, but at the other end, close to where I am, there's a lot of flexibility out there. But like you
Mhm.
said, you got to step out. You got to feel a little uncomfortable, because if you
You do.
don't, people are going to see right through you. And I've
Right.
noticed that many times.
Yeah, and I'll also say it's not easy balancing both. If you want to do both like this, you have to say no to a lot of stuff that makes you feel good. You can't, like, I rarely go out, which is crazy for me. I used to go out all the time. I don't watch TV hardly ever anymore. Uh, So you just have to, you have the time, or you can make time for if it's a priority, and you
Exactly.
have to say no to a lot.
Well, I certainly understand that. It's interesting because with my podcasting and now with coaching, and I still work some IT work, I do have to balance and I do have to know when to say, you know what, these are my recording times. This is my coaching time. This is the time that, yes, I'm going to be out and about, calling on clients, IT wise. Some of us don't understand that we're allowed to say no. And it's very, it can just make the difference in how you go about your day.
Absolutely.
But interestingly enough, you're working in a field that I think is so important. So I'm going to ask you to talk to us a little bit about renewable energy because so many people, oh, we're in an energy crisis. I don't know what to do. And yet we all can do something. So any suggestions?
Vote. If you own a company, go renewable. Even if it's just at your home's not making a huge dent on the problem, but it's still making an impact. We do big like utility scale stuff,
Sure.
which makes a bigger dent in the problem. But yeah, another thing besides energy is recycling. My sister is a physicist to be. She's in school for physics, and I was asking her, like, why don't they just, sounds like such a, she's so smart. And sometimes I'll say things and she's like, how are we related? But I was like, why don't they just send the landfill stuff into space? I think that's a reasonable thing to do. They send stuff to space all the time, and you can't, if you take that much mass off of the Earth, the theory is it will throw it off its axis. The gravity could change. All these things could go awry.
Yeah.
So there's really nothing they can do with landfill. So definitely recycle. Definitely recycle.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I live in a condo subdivision and we have recycling. And, I'm always asking my neighbors, if you don't want to recycle, bring your stuff over to me. I'll put it in my recycling pile,
Yeah.
I go through everything. I separate everything. I rinse out the containers like they ask us to. And even though I cannot actually do a composting in my yard, I do some. So I know there are certain biodegradable foods that I can easily put in my garden and have made my flowers grow even nicer.
Yeah.
Especially if you have coffee grounds, everybody, coffee grounds are one of the best things. So we all can do something. We all can, uh, just make this a cleaner world. And that would just be absolutely wonderful. And if you say, well, it's only me, well, no, it's not only you. If you do it, you can influence somebody else to do it as well. So on Recycle Day, my fill looks bigger than all my neighbors, and they're always asking me, like, where do you get all that stuff from? And I just point to all the different houses who bring me over their cardboard and in plastic.
I love it.
Yeah.
Good for you. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, my parents were always somewhat of recyclers. My mother always found a use for something. She collected newspapers and recycled newspapers ever since I was a little girl. But she would find buttons or anything around, that may be laying outside. She'd pick it up and she'd find a use for it. And so that's, how I've been. And my husband is a collector of stuff. So just so that everybody knows, I went through a lot of his collection. And I have a family that is doing crafts this summer. And so
Yeah.
all this stuff is going to them. That's another way to recycle. So, we can all do it. Catherine, if you have words of wisdom for our listeners, what would your biggest words of wisdom be today?
I mentioned it before, but my biggest regret on anything I do is always I didn't start before. So just start. If you think you're going to be bad, you probably are. Prepare yourself for that and just start.
Well, it's okay to be bad because you can turn around and correct it. So, and bad is not necessarily bad. It just means, hey, it's another step in our learning. Thank you
Yeah,
so
you
much.
didn't lose anything. Oh, you're welcome so much. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. And have a beautiful day in New York. Take
Thank
care now.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.